The notary had barely finished the first sentence of her will when her nephew sprang to his feet, jabbed a shaking finger at me, and shouted, "You manipulated her for money." And that was the moment I realized her family wasn't just greedy. They were about to try to bury me along with her. My name is Claire Vale, and for 3 years I mowed her lawn, fixed her leaks, carried her groceries, and sat with her through long, aching evenings that her own blood could not be bothered to endure. Now those same people stood in my living room, eyes wild, calling me a vulture. My knees trembled, but it wasn't fear that made them shake. It was the terrible calm of a woman who already knew something they did not. The old woman they were disrespecting had left me the sharpest knife of all, her truth, written down, signed, and sealed. If family betrayal scares you, subscribe now and drop a comment before the next twist hits. When I first moved to Pine Hollow, Massachusetts, the town felt like a waiting room between two lives. I had left the city after a divorce that tore my pride to ribbons. At 37, I slept on a second-hand mattress in a little cedar cottage that smelled of dust and lemon cleaner, and told myself that quiet was the same thing as peace. It was not. Peace is chosen. My quiet was just the absence of witnesses. The morning I met her, the air had a bitter edge. October wind rushed down Maple Row, scraping leaves into ragged piles against the stone fences. I had just finished installing shelves for a client and was walking back to my truck, toolbox in hand, when I heard the soft thud of something hitting pavement, followed by a small, strained wow. I turned. At the end of the lane, an elderly woman stood frozen on the curb, 2 paper grocery bags split at the bottom. Cans rolled in slow circles around her shoes. A glass jar of preserves wobbled on its side, like it was deciding whether to survive. "I am so sorry," she murmured, her voice feather-thin. "My hands, they don't always listen anymore." I set the toolbox down and hurried over. "Let me help," I said. Her eyes met mine, pale blue, clouded at the edges, yet startlingly alert. Up close, I could see the careful way she had pinned her silver hair, the clean but worn coat, the scuffed leather shoes polished within an inch of their lives. There was pride there, and a kind of fragile dignity that made me stand straighter. "Thank you," she breathed. "I live just up the walk." I'm afraid I overestimated what I could carry. She introduced herself as Donna Harrow. I repeated the name in my head, the way one does with a street you know you'll be driving again. Her cottage sat half a block from mine, a weathered, clapboard house with green shutters and a small, stubborn rose garden battling the wind. Inside, the air smelled of lavender sachets, beeswax polish, and something baking, a cinnamon loaf, cooling on a rack beside the stove. I carried the groceries to the kitchen while she shuffled behind me, apologizing every 3 steps. "I hate being a bother," she said. "My nephew keeps reminding me that at my age I should be simplifying, not buying flour by the sack and pretending I still throw dinner parties." "There are worse things to pretend," I replied, placing the bags on the counter. The warmth of the oven wrapped around me like an old quilt. She glanced at my toolbox by the door. "Are you a handyman, Miss Claire?" And I try to be. I do carpentry and odd jobs, whatever keeps the lights on. "Then perhaps you and I are neighbors with convenient timing," she said, a spark of mischief flickering through the fatigue in her face. "My back gate is hanging onto its hinges by prayer alone." That was how it started. In the weeks that followed, I fixed the back gate, then the loose porch step, then the dripping bathroom faucet. She tried to pay me in cash, but her hands shook as she opened her little coin purse, and I could not bring myself to take more than a token. "Fine," she declared one evening, planting her small hands on her hips. "If you won't let me pay in money, you will accept payment in supper. A Harrow does not take charity." "Then I'll accept supper," I said, "on one condition." Her brows rose. "Which is?" "You sit and tell me stories while I eat. Otherwise, it's you taking charity from me, and we cannot have that." The left corner of her mouth lifted. It was the first smile I had seen that reached her eyes. Most nights I ate alone in my cottage, with the hum of the old refrigerator for company. At Donna's table, a new kind of silence lived between us, the comfortable kind, filled with the clink of cutlery and the soft murmur of weather reports from the radio on the shelf. She told me about the husband she had buried 15 years before, a quiet mechanic named Louis who loved jazz and motor oil in equal measure. She told me about her years as an art teacher, about teenagers who drew with their headphones in and surprised her with their tenderness when they thought no one was looking. When she spoke of her children, however, something in her voice shifted. It did not break. It retreated. My daughter Rowan lives down south. Busy woman, always traveling. My nephew Spencer is in banking, which I am told is a respectable way of worrying about numbers all day. Her smile thinned. They insist I am well cared for. Do they visit often? I asked. She stirred her tea for too long. Often enough to remember what I look like, I suppose. There were other details I should have paid more attention to. The way she flinched when the phone rang and the caller ID flashed her nephew's name. The way she tucked documents inside cookbooks, as if hiding them from someone. The way she always insisted on walking me to the door and watching until I crossed the yard to my own gate, as though making sure I reached safety instead of the other way around. My first clear warning came on a Tuesday afternoon, heavy with rain. I had stopped by to check a leak in her attic. As I climbed down the narrow ladder, I heard a sound I had never heard from her before, a stifled sob, raw and small. I followed it to the back garden. There, behind the rose bushes stripped nearly bare by the season, Donna sat on a faded wooden bench, her shoulders shaking. Her shawl had slipped, revealing a dark bruise like spilled ink along the inside of her forearm. "Donna?" I asked softly. She jerked, tugging the shawl back into place so fast it made her wince. "Oh, Claire, I did not hear you. I was just having a sentimental moment." "Comes with being old and ridiculous." "That doesn't look sentimental," I said gently. "Did you fall?" A pause, just wide enough to fit a lie. "It's nothing," she whispered. "Truly. At my age, one bump seems to bloom into a painting." She smiled, but the smile wobbled. I knew I should press. My gut tugged at me like a child pulling a sleeve, yet I also knew humiliation when I saw it. I mistook her shame for privacy instead of the warning it was. "All right," I said eventually, "if you're sure." Donna dabbed at her eyes with the corner of her shawl. "You are a good neighbor, Claire. Better than I deserve." I shook my head. Everyone deserves a decent neighbor. Later, lying awake in my dark cottage, listening to the rain tap against the window pane, I replayed the tremor in her voice, the way she had said nothing happened today, as if the calendar had tally marks in its margins. That should have been the moment I truly understood she was frightened of someone. Instead, I told myself a comfortable story. She is just old. Old people bruise easily. Old people cry at memories. It would be months before I realized how dangerous that kind of denial can be. The first time I met her family, the air pressure changed. It was late November. The sun had already slipped behind the trees by mid-afternoon, and the temperature plunged so quickly the puddles from the morning thaw began to skin over with thin ice. I was in Donna's front yard, raking leaves while she supervised from the porch, with a mug of tea between her hands, when a silver SUV turned onto the street and rolled to a stop in her drive. The vehicle did not belong to Pine Hollow. You could tell by the shine. Our town wore its years openly. That SUV looked like it had never seen a gravel road. A man in an expensive wool coat stepped out first, phone pressed to his ear. He had Donna's nose, but none of her warmth. Behind him came a woman in high-heeled boots, wholly unsuited to our uneven sidewalks, her hair arranged in careful waves that did not dare move in the wind. A teenage boy slid out last, thumbs moving on his screen with the focus of a surgeon. "Here we go," Donna murmured. The man ended his call without saying goodbye and surveyed the yard as if appraising a property he intended to flip. "Aunt Donna," he said, climbing the porch steps to air-kiss her cheek. "You should have told us you were hiring outside help." "I did not hire her," she replied lightly. "Claire lives on Maple Row. She is my neighbor." His eyes traveled down to me. They were a cool hazel, but there was nothing soft about them. Neighbor and what? Gardener? Errand girl? "Spencer," the woman chided, though her smile carried the same disdain. "You must forgive my husband. He has a very direct way with people. I am Lorna." She extended a gloved hand toward me like someone greeting staff at a resort. "Claire," I said, wiping leaf bits from my palm before taking hers. "Good to meet you." The teenage boy did not look up. "Reed, say hello," Lorna ordered. "Hey," he muttered, eyes still on the little glowing screen. Spencer turned back to Donna. "You know you don't need to bring strangers into your home. If you need things done, you can call us." "You live an hour away," she said quietly. "Claire is across the street." "Yes, and that is exactly why it looks inappropriate," Spencer replied, pitching his voice just loud enough to carry to me. "An older woman alone, constantly hosting an unrelated woman. People talk, Aunt Donna. You do understand that." Donna's cheeks flushed a delicate pink, the same color they turned when the oven was too hot. I felt the words like a slap, but I kept my hands on the rake. "I just help when she needs it, that's all." Spencer gave me a thin smile. "Of course you do." That should have been my second warning. The way he looked at me, not as a person, but as a threat to be managed. But I told myself he was simply overprotective. I told myself it was not my place to interfere. 2 weeks later, the whispers began. The Pine Hollow Community Church was the kind of place where everyone knew when you sat in a different pew. Donna had been asking me to attend the Advent service with her, and I finally agreed. The sanctuary smelled of beeswax and evergreen wreaths. Children shuffled on the front steps, practicing hymns under their breath. Donna and I sat halfway down the left side. She wore a navy dress and her best pearl brooch. I could see the pride in her posture. She wanted the town to see she was not alone. Halfway through the sermon, a shadow slipped into the aisle beside us. Spencer. He had not been there at the beginning. His late arrival was deliberate. He leaned over Donna, his mouth almost at her ear. "You should have told us you needed an escort," he murmured. "Some might misinterpret this." Her shoulders tensed. "Claire is my friend." "Is that what we call it?" he replied softly. His gaze flicked to me, then away, as though I were furniture. After the service, as we gathered our coats, I heard him speaking to Pastor Monroe near the front. "I worry about my aunt," he said, voice low but not low enough. "She's always been generous, too generous. There's a woman spending a lot of time at her house. We don't want anyone taking advantage of her, you understand." The pastor glanced over at me, then back at Spencer, frowning faintly. I pretended not to hear. My ears burned. Donna fussed with her gloves, her fingers clumsy, her face drawn. On the walk back, she apologized to me. "I am sorry if Spencer's way embarrasses you," she said. "You have nothing to be sorry for," I replied, more sharply than intended. I swallowed my frustration. He doesn't know me. If he did, he wouldn't talk like that. Donna smiled sadly. "Oh, he knows you just enough. That is the trouble." I did not understand what she meant. I would, soon. The real damage began in places with fluorescent lights and discount signs. One gray afternoon, I stopped at Price Mart, our local grocery, to pick up flour and sugar for a batch of cinnamon rolls Donna wanted to try. I was comparing labels when 2 women from town rounded the corner of the aisle. Marlene Haverly, who ran the post office, and Tess Bruckner, who knew everyone's business because she delivered half of it. They did not see me at first, or perhaps they did and simply did not care. "I'm telling you, I've seen her truck there almost every night," Marlene said, lowering her voice only enough to make people lean in. "Middle-aged woman, single, always helping with something." "Women like that are rarely doing charity," Tess replied. "You know how it goes. Lonely widow, No children nearby, a house in her name. One day she'll sign a paper she doesn't understand, and that neighbor will walk away with the roof over her head. A bag of sugar nearly slipped from my hand. "You cannot know that," Marlene said, though there was eagerness in her tone. "Maybe she's decent." "Decent women keep a distance," Tess answered. "Mark my words, there will be a will involved. There always is." I stepped forward then, more loudly than necessary. "Afternoon, ladies." They jolted, color rushing to their cheeks. Tess recovered first, pasting on a brittle smile. "Oh, Claire, we didn't see you there." "Clearly," I said. My heart hammered, but I kept my voice level. "If you have questions about my intentions toward my neighbor, you are welcome to ask me directly. Gossip tends to rot the teeth." Marlene busied herself with the canned vegetables. Tess stammered something about only being concerned. I left them there, my jaw clenched so tight it ached. That should have been my third warning. The smear campaign had begun. But instead of tracing it back to Spencer and Lorna, I blamed the smallness of small towns, told myself rumors blew over like summer storms. They did not. At Donna's, the pattern deepened. On one visit, I arrived just as Lorna was packing up designer tote bags by the door. Jewelry boxes peeked out from the top of one. "You're just in time," Lorna said with a bright, brittle cheerfulness. "Aunt Donna insisted we take some of her things. No point leaving them to gather dust," she said. Donna stood near the mantel, her smile fixed in place, like a painting nailed too tightly to the wall. "They are only trinkets," she murmured. I had seen some of those trinkets before. A brooch her mother had worn to her wedding, a watch Louis had given her on their 40th anniversary. I had watched her dust them with reverence. "Are you sure you want to part with those?" I asked carefully. Spencer appeared from the hallway holding a folder. "Careful, Claire. You don't want to sound like you're criticizing her decisions. She's still perfectly capable of choosing who receives what." His tone made it sound as though he believed exactly the opposite. I swallowed my protest. It was not my fight, I told myself. Besides, what could I say? I was only the neighbor who patched the fence when it broke. Later that evening, as I tightened a loose cabinet hinge for Donna, she spoke in a low voice. "They tell me it is easier if I start distributing assets now," she said. "Less paperwork after." "If that is what you want, then it is your right," I replied. "But if it is only what they want—" I trailed off. Her eyes found mine, tired and sharp. "You see more than you admit," she said. I wish that were true. In reality, I saw just enough to be uneasy, but not enough to act. 2 days before Christmas, Spencer's campaign reached its ugliest point. Pine Hollow hosted a holiday luncheon at the community center, a potluck affair where everyone brought their best dish and their sharpest opinions. Donna insisted we go. She had baked 2 apple tarts and wanted to see the children's choir. We sat at a long table near the stage. The hall smelled of roast turkey, pine boughs, and coffee that had been reheated one too many times. Voices rose in overlapping conversations. Partway through the meal, I excused myself to refill Donna's tea. As I stood at the drinks table, I heard Spencer's voice behind me, addressed to a cluster of townsfolk. "We're just doing what any responsible family would do," he was saying. "My aunt has always been generous to a fault. Now there's this woman, nice enough, I am sure, but always in her house, accepting meals, doing little favors. We just worry she might be pressured into decisions she doesn't fully understand." A murmur of sympathetic clucks answered him. "Is she being paid?" someone asked. "Oh, I doubt it," Spencer replied. "I think she's hoping for a different kind of payment. You know how lonely widows can be." There was a ripple of uncomfortable laughter. The teapot in my hand felt suddenly heavy. I turned, catching his eye. A brief silence fell over the small group. "Claire," Spencer said smoothly, "we were just talking about how grateful we are that you look out for Aunt Donna." "Is that what you were saying?" I asked quietly. His smile did not reach his eyes. "Of course. What else would we be saying?" The others shifted, avoiding my gaze. Donna, across the room, watched us with a pinched expression. I wanted to take her hand, walk out with her, leave Pine Hollow and never return. But life does not often grant such sweeping exits. The luncheon dragged on. People sang carols. Children knocked over plastic cups. Spencer clapped loudly at everything, the picture of a devoted nephew. That night, as I walked home through the crisp, brittle air, I felt the humiliation settle into my bones, a cold older than the winter. But I told myself, once again, that I could endure a little public discomfort if it meant Donna did not have to face her family's moods alone. I did not yet understand that they were preparing a far larger humiliation for both of us. That should have been my fourth and final warning, but by then I was in too deep to step back. The storm that exposed everything began with broken glass. Rain hammered Maple Row, slanting hard against the windows. I was at my kitchen table, sanding a cabinet door, when I heard a sharp crash next door and a choked cry that sliced straight through the noise of the storm. I ran without thinking. Donna's front door, always locked, always bolted, stood slightly ajar. That alone told me something was wrong. I pushed it open. "Donna." Her reply came from the kitchen, thin but steady. "In here." She was on the floor when I reached her. Half propped against a chair, her reading glasses shattered beside her like a broken insect. Her shawl had slipped from her shoulders. Her hair had come loose. The sight of her, so small on the cold linoleum, cut me deeper than I could explain. "I tripped," she said quickly, as if rehearsed. "Rug slid, pride bruised, nothing more." I helped her into a chair, checked her pupils, her pulse, the side of her head. No obvious injury. Still, her fingers shook when she reached for the edge of the table. That was when I saw the folder beneath it. It lay half exposed, as if the fall had tugged it from hiding. A thick cardboard file, edges frayed, marked in her careful hand. Finances and legal. I would have slid it back under with my boot if she had not followed my gaze. "Bring it here," she whispered. "I am tired of carrying it alone." I fetched the folder, set it between us. "Donna, if this is private—" "You have earned the right to see what they are doing," she said. "Sit, Claire." Inside the folder was a life dissected into numbers and signatures, bank statements with red circles around withdrawals she swore she had never made, photocopies of checks signed D. Harrow in a hand that mimicked hers clumsily, too heavy, too slanted, like a forgery that relied on haste. Letters from a Boston law firm sent not to her but to Spencer, discussing guardianship options and accelerating estate planning. In the middle of the stack sat a formal petition, stamped by the court, in which Spencer claimed that his aunt's declining cognition made her vulnerable to undue influence from non-family members. "That is you," she said dryly, tapping the phrase with one finger. "The non-family influence." My jaw clenched. "He filed this without telling you?" "I found it when I opened a letter that was not supposed to be opened by me," she replied. Apparently, incompetence now includes the ability to steam envelopes. She reached deeper into the folder and drew out a smaller sealed envelope, thick as if it held more than paper. On the front, in blue ink, "To be opened by my executor." "You have an executor?" I asked. "Yes," she said, meeting my eyes. "You." The kitchen light hummed above us. Outside, rain lashed the windows. Inside, the word hung between us like a bridge I was afraid to step onto. "Donna, that makes no sense," I managed. "You have family, a daughter, a nephew. Why would you ask a carpenter with a failing truck to guard your estate?" "Because," she said softly, "my family began guarding my estate from me. You are the only one who has not asked what I intend to leave you." Her mouth curved in a bitter smile. "Which is why I chose to leave you more than you would ever have dared to request." I thought of the rumors at PriceMart, of Spencer's insinuations at church, of the bruises she hid under her shawl. "This is why they hate me," I said slowly. "They suspect you changed something for my sake." "They suspect I opened my eyes," she replied. "You will not talk me out of this, so do not try. What you can do is be ready when I am no longer here to contradict them." A car door slammed outside. All at once her shoulders stiffened. "Too late," she murmured. "They are here." Spencer did not knock so much as collide with the front door. It banged against the stopper. Lorna's perfume arrived a second before she did. "Aunt Donna, why is your door unlocked?" he demanded, striding into the kitchen. Then he saw me. "Of course." "I fell," Donna said before he could accuse. "Claire helped me up. Try thank you before interrogation, Spencer. It is better manners." He took in the 2 mugs on the table, the folder near my elbow. His eyes narrowed. "You know this looks inappropriate," he said. "You alone with her, signing God knows what?" "I have signed nothing today," she cut in, "unless you count surviving another visit." Lorna forced a laugh. "We just worry, that's all. There are people who prey on kind souls." "On that, we agree," I said quietly. For a moment, something like unease flickered across Spencer's face. Then the mask slid back. "You may think you found a patron saint in my aunt," he told me, "but I promise you this. If her will reflects your presence more than ours, we will not let it stand." Donna's hand brushed mine under the table, the slightest of touches. "Be still," it said. "Not yet." "Out," she said aloud. "I am tired and no longer in the mood to be warned about the woman who waters my flowers. Come back when you are prepared to speak to her as my guest, not my captor." He left with an angry whirl of his coat, but as his car pulled away, I knew the next round would be worse. It was. 6 months later, she was gone. Mid-story CTA. If you're still watching, tell me in the comments. Have you ever ignored a warning sign because you wanted to believe someone had good intentions? And subscribe now so you don't miss the second half of this story. Donna died on a clear May morning while the town was arguing about parking spaces and potholes. I was repairing porch railings across town when my phone rang. The caller ID displayed a law firm I did not recognize. "Ms. Vale?" a measured male voice asked. "This is Adrian Gallen. I was Miss Harrow's attorney. I am sorry to inform you that she passed away in her sleep last night." The hammer slipped from my hand. It thudded against the boards. Gallen went on, words distant and tinny. Executor, will, reading, Saturday. Her express instructions that it be held at my cottage, not his office. When the call ended, I stared at the rail without seeing it. The world had the indecency to remain unchanged. Saws buzzing, a distant dog barking, the smell of cut cedar in the air. That evening, an envelope from Gallen awaited me on my table when I returned home. Inside lay the formal notice, a copy of the will, and a second envelope in Donna's handwriting. "Dear Claire, if you are holding this, I have finally done what my doctor told me to do years ago. I have stopped arguing with gravity. Do not waste time wishing you had done more. You did enough, more than enough. You stayed. By now, Mr. Gallen has told you that you are my executor. You are likely pacing your kitchen, muttering that I have put you in an impossible position. You are right. You will forgive me later. I changed my will the day I realized my relatives were not visiting, but circling. You have seen the copies of what they attempted, the petition, the withdrawals. What you have not seen is how long I wrestled with the idea of entrusting a stranger with more power than those who share my blood. You made the decision for me in small ways. You refused payment you could not afford to refuse. You fixed things I was too embarrassed to mention. You left my dignity intact when you could have stepped over it. So here is what I ask of you now. Do not shout. Do not beg them to understand. Let the documents do the talking. Wolves are not converted by speeches, but they do quiet down when the shepherd shows them the fence. Mr. Gallen has copies of everything, my statement, the recordings, the forged forms. If they try to tear you apart, open the envelope labeled Family Gathering and invite an audience. I know you dislike attention. Think of it as my last class. The subject is consequences. You are only the substitute teacher. Water the roses. With more gratitude than I ever managed to say aloud, Donna. I pressed the letter to the table to stop my hands from shaking. Grief and a grim, steady anger braided together inside me. They had circled her. She had seen it. And instead of going quietly, she had laid a careful trap under her own name. In the days before the will reading, I met with Adrian Gallen in his small upstairs office. He was a tidy man with ink on his fingers and tired kindness in his eyes. "She was completely lucid when she signed this," he said, tapping the will. "I will testify to that. Her doctor will as well. Your neighbor was formidable." He showed me the evidence file, scanned statements, copies of the guardianship petition, a tiny device Donna had left in his keeping containing the recordings she had made during key conversations. Listening to Spencer and Lorna on that audio was like eavesdropping on wolves, complaining that the sheep would not hold still. I spent my evenings at the same kitchen table where I had once eaten her pies, spreading out papers, sketching a rough plan. Phase 1. The will reading. Let Gallen handle the law. I would stay calm, speak only when necessary, and watch who showed their teeth. Phase 2. The memorial. Donna had requested a gathering, not a funeral, at the community center. That, she hinted in a postscript, was where she wanted the truth to play on a larger screen if her family tried to destroy me. Phase 3. Whatever came after. Lawsuits, apologies, or the long, slow work of distributing her trust as she'd instructed. One more precaution. I called an old acquaintance, a former police officer named Mark Ellery, who now did quiet investigative work. "Elder financial abuse?" he said when I outlined the situation. "You always did pick light hobbies, Claire. Can you be in the room on Saturday?" I asked. Not as a cop, just as someone who knows what they're looking at if they see a threat. "I'll bring my best just a friend face," he said. "People say more when they think no one official is listening." By Friday night, the pieces were in place. I cleaned my cottage more thoroughly than it had ever been cleaned. I borrowed extra chairs from Mrs. Klein. I laid out coffee cups and a plate because Donna would have scolded me if I hosted people, even hostile ones, without offering something to drink. On the dresser by the door, I placed the folder marked Family Gathering. Let them come, I thought. For once in my life, I was prepared to stop apologizing and start documenting. Comment whose side you're on and subscribe before the will is read. They arrived on Saturday with grief on their faces and calculation in their eyes. Rowan came first, straight from the train, her dark hair pulled back, her navy suit still bearing the faint wrinkles of travel. Her sadness looked genuine, but there was something guarded about her posture, like she was braced for impact. "Thank you for doing this here," she said at the door. "My mother used to say your kitchen smelled like cinnamon and sawdust. She liked it." "It smells mostly of nerves today," I replied, and she gave a small, pained smile. Spencer and Lorna swept in next, with Reed trailing behind like a reluctant shadow. Spencer wore grief like a pressed shirt, perfectly arranged, clearly chosen that morning. Lorna's eyes were already rimmed in red, but her glance slid over my modest furniture with veiled contempt. Mark arrived last in jeans and a plain shirt, carrying a small notebook. I introduced him as an old friend here for support. Spencer gave him a brief, dismissive once-over and sat. Adrian Gallen took the chair by the small coffee table, opened his leather folder, and cleared his throat. "As you know," he began, "we are here to read the last will and testament of Ms. Donna Harrow. She requested that it be read in Ms. Vale's home, as she is the appointed executor." Rowan's head turned. "You?" "Yes," Gallen said. "Your mother signed the designation last year. I have documentation of her mental capacity at the time, which I can provide if necessary." Spencer's jaw flexed. "Of course she's the executor," he muttered. "Why else would she be so eager to host this circus?" I kept my eyes on the table. Gallen began to read. The preamble was standard. The tone was not. I, Donna Harrow, he read, being of sound mind and entirely too old to pretend otherwise, declare this my last will and testament. If you are hearing this, it means gravity has finally won, and you have all taken time out of your busy schedules to see what I have left behind. Do sit down. Some of it may surprise you. A ripple of uneasy smiles moved through the room. The small bequests came first. To Rowan, the contents of the studio and the family letters. To Reed, Lewis's record player and jazz collection. To a few old friends in town, small gifts, books, a painting each. Then came the lines that made Spencer's ears turn scarlet. To my nephew, Spencer, Gallon read, I leave the set of ledgers he once told me no one reads anymore, and a note. Someone is always reading. In this case, it was me. May you study the chapters on fiduciary duty as carefully as you studied the ones on profit. Spencer half rose. She did not write that. Gallon lifted his brows. She did. I have the signed originals. To his wife, Lorna, he continued mercilessly, I leave the brooch, the watch, and the necklace she removed from my house last year while telling me she was helping me declutter. Possession is 9/10 of the law, my dear, but good conscience owns the remaining 10. Lorna's mouth opened and closed. She begged me to take those. She said they depressed her. Adrian closed the first page and turned to the second. And the remainder of my estate, he read, including the house at 14 Maple Row, the funds in my remaining accounts, and any other assets not specifically mentioned, I place into a trust to be administered by my executor, Ms. Claire Vale, for the benefit of Pine Hollow residents in need, with a special focus on elderly neighbors and young artists. He continued, voice even. No direct cash gifts shall be made from this trust to any blood relative of mine unless they can demonstrate, with documented evidence, that they have provided unpaid, consistent care to an elderly person with no expectation of inheritance for a period of no less than 12 months. A stunned silence dropped over the room. Rowan bowed her head, pressing her fingers to her lips. Spencer shot to his feet. This is absurd, he snapped. You cannot seriously expect us to accept that a woman who's known her 3 years gets control over everything while her own family is cut off unless we volunteer for charity? She expected exactly that, Adrian replied calmly, and the court will enforce it unless this will is successfully challenged. I should warn you, he added, that Ms. Harrow anticipated objections. She left a personal statement and a set of exhibits to accompany it. He unfolded a separate sheet. To those in this room who share my blood, he read, I know what you are thinking, that I must have been confused, pressured, perhaps even manipulated by the woman sitting quietly near the window. You will tell each other this, because the alternative, that I saw you clearly and chose against you, is too heavy for you to bear. I was not confused. I am old, not foolish. When I saw unauthorized withdrawals from my accounts, when I heard talk of guardianship filed behind my back, when jewelry walked out of my house while I was told I should be grateful to have less clutter, I did what you never expected. I started taking notes. And I gave those notes and the evidence that goes with them to the only person in my life who had not tried to cash me in. Adrian's tone stayed neutral, but the words landed like dropped stones. At this point, he said, looking up, I must inform you that Ms. Harrow provided my office with copies of the guardianship petition, the bank statements, and audio recordings of certain conversations. If you wish to challenge the will on the basis of undue influence, those materials will become part of the court record. Spencer's fury faltered, replaced by calculation. This is blackmail, he said, but it lacked conviction. It is documentation, I answered quietly. Blackmail involves lies. Your aunt told the truth. He turned on me. You think you've won, he spat. You think you're some hero, a handyman who lucked into a fortune. Heroes are for storybooks, I said. I am an executor with a stack of unflattering facts. That's all. Rowan stood slowly. I will not contest it, she said, her voice hoarse. She made her choice. Whatever our failings were, and there were plenty, this was how she wanted to answer them. She looked at me, then at the table where the will lay. Use it well, she said. If you don't, I'll come after you myself. It was the closest thing to a blessing she could give. In the weeks that followed, Donna's revenge settled over Pine Hollow like a new weather pattern. Spencer's threat to challenge the will evaporated the moment his lawyer laid eyes on the evidence file Gallon had prepared. Even if you won, the man reportedly told him, you'd lose. Fraud investigations have a way of widening. You don't want that kind of light on your books. He took a leave of absence from his firm. In a town as small as ours, the phrase quickly became a punchline, delivered with raised eyebrows. Lorna returned the jewelry in a plain box, dropping it on my table with a curt, I suppose you'll administer these too. I'll place them where she intended, I replied, on display, not in court. Reed surprised me most. He showed up one Saturday carrying Lewis's record player as if it were made of glass. She said it's mine, he said, but I don't feel right just taking it. She wrote that thing about me learning to listen. I figured maybe I should start by listening to you explain how this thing even works. He helped me catalog old records for the Trust's little community studio. He ran errands when elderly residents applied for small grants, delivering groceries, fixing mailboxes, doing all the mundane acts of kindness his parents had once dismissed as beneath them. I don't want to end up like them, he admitted once, eyes on the spinning vinyl. Angry at the world because it didn't bow. Then don't, I said. Help someone who can't pay you back. That was your aunt's favorite kind of interest. The trust, once it was fully established, became a quiet artery running through Pine Hollow. We paid the heating bill for a widower too proud to ask. We bought paints and canvases for a high schooler whose talent outstripped her parents' budget. We funded a ramp for a retired librarian's front steps so she could leave her house without dreading every descent. Each time I signed off on a grant, I pictured Donna making some dry comment about finally getting a decent return. The house at 14 Maple Row did not become my private prize. I moved into it because my own cottage had more mold than insulation, but the studio became community space. Once a week, children came to smear color on paper and tell stories with their hands. Their laughter filled rooms that had once echoed with the sharp edge of Spencer's voice. Sometimes in the evenings, I'd sit at her kitchen table with a cup of tea and hear old floorboards creak in the next room, the house settling into its new life. On the first anniversary of her death, I stood in Donna's garden at dusk, fingers stained with soil. The roses had survived their grief better than I had. Thick canes, glossy leaves, buds just beginning to open. The air smelled of earth and petals and the faint, distant scent of someone grilling on a nearby porch. Behind me, through the open window, I could hear the low murmur of a radio and the scratch of a paintbrush. Rowan had come up for the weekend and was working on a small landscape in the studio, using her mother's old brushes. She'd complain that I never cleaned them properly, she had said, smiling through tears. Then she'd use them anyway. I thought of the arc of the year, from that first shattered grocery bag to the shattered illusions at my kitchen table, from rumors in supermarket aisles to recordings played in a crowded hall, from being painted as a predator to handing out small, stubborn acts of justice in her name. Donna had orchestrated the whole thing with the patience of someone who had spent her life coaxing understanding out of distracted students. Her final lesson had not been about art or history. It had been about boundaries. Do not let people rewrite your story simply because they share your surname. Do not mistake a soft voice for a weak will. And when faced with quiet cruelty wrapped in polite concern, do not respond with louder polite concern. Respond with documentation, with truth. with a will that says what everyone else is too afraid to say. I knelt, pressed my palm to the cool soil, and spoke aloud, though no one human was there to hear. "You were right," I said. "Shouting would never have changed them, but your words on paper did." A breeze lifted, carrying the scent of roses past my face. It felt absurdly like agreement. If you are listening to this and some part of you is thinking of an aunt, a mother, a neighbor whose generosity has become a hunting ground for selfish relatives, let this story be your warning and your permission. Warning because wolves rarely arrive with teeth bared. They come smiling, offering to help with the paperwork. Permission because you are allowed to choose the person who truly sees you to guard what you leave behind, even if that person is just a neighbor with sawdust on her boots. Tell me in the comments what you'd have done and subscribe for more justice. Thank you so much for listening. See you in our next story.